Apart from two fixed points, the Land's End John O Groats ride is very flexible. It can be almost whatever you want, and whilst we were doing our journey, we saw people taking in lots of different options. For us, it was a chance to share the cycle camping that we'd enjoyed individually, to crack an iconic ride, to follow a prepared route, and personally to celebrate 4 years of good health since cancer surgery. We talked about it quite a bit in increasingly specific but still vaguely non-committal terms, but once the tickets were bought, it got very real. 31st of May 2022 was a day of starts. Off to the train at Cambridge. The journey to Penzance, with much of the luggage removed and one of the bike bars turned to fit the storage cupboard on the train. And arrival in a foreign county with bilingual signs. We rebuilt our bikes and met the first of our Cornish hills on the way to Land's End, on an otherwise gentle ride to where the sign is. But more importantly, the Longship's Lighthouse, one of the Stevenson lighthouses that became a theme for our ride. This is the Land's End National Cycle Network milepost. It makes it clear that we have got a task ahead of us. Our first day was very short, and we set the pattern of camping which would see us through the trip. We were away for 31 nights. We used 14 campsites, 6 off-site camps with permission, 4 wild camps in Scotland where it's allowed, for various reasons 5 nights in hotels, and then 2 nights on ferries. On a couple of occasions we had to be a bit inventive. Could those be gravestones in the background? But we found a place to go every night and enjoyed some amazing pictures. Given the chance, some of our hosts surprised themselves with the warmth of their hospitality. The camping was something which we enjoyed. Being able to pitch up for the night and move on in the morning is a wonderful freedom. For us, it wasn't just Land's End John O Groats, but we were going to take in Cape Wrath, the northwestern corner of Britain with its Stevenson lighthouse, and visits to Orkney and Shetland. We averaged 51 miles a day over 30 days, with daily distances ranging from our first day of 8 hilly miles in Cornwall to 90 miles across the Cheshire Plain. We had our own tents and did our own cooking, but we worked together on wayfinding, shopping and maintenance, although Roger's experience set him up as tour guide and chief mechanic. We had 1 puncture and some minor wear and tear issues, but no serious mechanicals at all. The southwest was attractive, but hard work. Continual short, steep climbs and descents with very high hedges, so not many views. Our route took in the Camel Trail out of Padstow and the Tarka Trail into Barnstaple, old railway routes with gentle gradients and great views from the legacy viaducts. The plains of the Midlands flew by, with many relics of industrial history. We paused on our way out of Manchester to visit some scenes of past family life, including the house where our mother grew up. And here's a picture from 65 years ago, Greenmount Congregational Church in Bury, the church where our parents married. Moving north, the Forest of Bowland was wild and steep, but surprised us with a steam rally before we hauled ourselves out over its northern hills, long and steep. With the right gears, you just need patience and a little stamina. It struck me again how whilst East Anglia is dominated by arable farming, the west side of the country farms livestock on endless acres of grass. Every day had variety. On one day we passed the ancient ruins of Penrith Castle, Skelton Radio Mast, the tallest built structure in the UK at 365 metres, and lunched with a cousin and his artist wife who I had never met before. And Scotland welcomed us, with rain. After a night's sleep, we pressed on towards Glasgow along a route that I'd driven a number of times. We passed Bettock Summit, dramatic hills and a good climb on cycle route 74, in the valley shared with the M6A74 and the West Coast Main Line. Then we dropped down into Glasgow and passed through on a series of paths largely following the River Clyde. We left the city on the route of an old railway line and were glad to be out in the countryside again, even though this was Midge territory. Through the Highlands we followed a lot of forest trails and old railway paths. The Pass of Dromochtus saw us on a dedicated path taking in the highest point on the national cycle network. The scenery changed every few miles, but everywhere you looked was a picture postcard view, even if a little damp at times. I became fascinated to watch the changing shape of the mountains as we passed them by. Here, Ben Lawyers across Loch Tay. Here, the River Garry, near Blair Athol. As we approached the north coast, we joined a main A road, but they're not like the ones round here. We crossed Strath Tirry, the largest peat bog in Europe and home to the Crask Inn, where we met the record-breaking 82-year-old Gina Harris, on her way to be the oldest woman to cycle Land's End John O Groats. She had enough energy for both of us. I got hung up on views again. These pictures were all taken over a 15-mile stretch. Just round the corner was this. And this is where it narrows into the Kyle of Sutherland. And on the way, we passed a listed building. Yes, really. I can remember when these populated the roadside like transport cafes, but they're a dying breed as well. Loch Loyal and Ben Strummond are home to a small colony of golden eagles. We didn't see any of them, but we had enough to look at. We hit the north coast at Tongue and pitched in the shelter of a hedge against a growing wind from the west. After a night's sleep, we crossed the causeway over the Kyle of Tongue to take a diversion west to Durness, to visit the northwest corner of Britain and its lighthouse at Cape Wrath. We'd been going to take the ferry across the Kyle of Durness and camp along the coast to return the next day, but the ferryman told us that with the winds forecast the next day there would be no ferry for 48 hours at least. But here's the deal. He'd take us across and we could leave our bags by the landing slip, ride to the Cape and be back, and he'd collect us at 7 that evening. It was a no-brainer. We motored across the Kyle, stripped the bikes and set off. The road was used to service the lighthouse until 1994 and has had no regular maintenance since then, and the area is often in use as a firing range by the MOD. It's rough and wild and empty, and we had a deadline to meet. After 90 minutes of fast riding, we rounded a hill and approached the lighthouse. It's now an LED array powered by solar panels, and the old equipment is being salvaged for scrap, so we weren't alone. But the location is magical. The open Atlantic, the cliffs of the north coast, the red granite stacks breaking the swell. And the Stevenson Lighthouse, built in 1828 and constantly manned by a crew of 3 until it was automated in 1998. We'd made it. We'd ticked off the first of the big boxes on our ride. But we had to rush back for that ferry. It was an exhilarating ride, and we arrived with about 15 minutes to spare. Such fun to enjoy our briefly lightweight bikes. We camped in Durness and rode back to Tongue. The wind was really strong. I got blown over a couple of times, and 28 miles was a day's work. But the sun broke through, and the Highland colours came to life. We watched the wind forming unique clouds over the mountain tops and finally dropped down into Tongue again. The wind blew itself out overnight, and several would-be campers too. So the next morning we hauled ourselves up from sea level to the coast road for Thurso in brilliant sunshine, enjoying amazing views of sandy beaches and bright blue seas. It was warm pedalling, but that water would have been very cold. Our last Scottish campsite, just east of Thurso, was tantalising. Just beyond Dunnet Head, we could see the cliffs of Orkney. But we had a job to do first. As we tracked eastwards, the sun gave way to a thick, cold fog, so we arrived at Duncansby Head to barely see the lighthouse and to take the presence of the sea on trust. Doubling back to John O Groats, there were pictures to take. This was the second big tick box of our ride, perhaps the biggest. But with the ferry moored in the harbour behind us, our minds were more on the next target than the present achievement. We made the most of a rather meagre cafe and a chat with other travellers before our bikes were stowed on the ferry. And John O Groats disappeared into the murk as we had the ferry to ourselves on the 40-minute crossing to Berwick on the South Ronaldsay. It was a short ride through the murk to our campsite, which we were told had great views. The next morning we saw them. We were tourists now and tracked north across the causeways linking the islands to surround Scapa Flow. We visited the fascinating excavations at Scarra Brae, an Iron Age settlement protected under a sand dune until 1928 and still being excavated. The Ring of Brodgar, on a small hill between 2 lakes, must have been very significant to the people at the time, and is still a beautiful location. We also visited the amazing chapel built into a Nissen hut by Italian prisoners of war who were building the causeways. It was a testament to the human search for the divine in the middle of the evils of war, an amazing work of art. The most northerly cathedral in the British Isles is in Kirkwall, and it's remarkable in its own way too. But the wind was back, and we caught the overnight ferry to the Shetlands, glad to be on board and escape the chill. Our first excursion was another ferry to the Iron Age broch or tower on the island of Musa. The tower is remarkable, the most complete in the world. We know a good deal about what brochs looked like, but no one is sure about why they were built. What has survived on Musa is remarkable. You can climb the stairs built inside the dry stone walls and admire the views. Views little changed from when it was built 2,000 years ago. The island is an RSPB reserve, so you keep to the footpath, but it is stunning, especially in the sunshine. We visited St Ninian's Isle and its natural curved beach, an amazing phenomenon. before camping at Spiggy Bay, an unforgettable location. It's quite a climb to the lighthouse at Sombra Head, the southern tip of the islands. A visit to the Stevenson Lighthouse enabled us to see the old equipment still in place, and the turning lens. The light is now provided by the LED unit clamped to the balcony rail. But just over the wall at the top of the cliffs we had a ringside view of the puffins gliding on the winds that buffeted us all day. They looked like living cartoon characters. There are no railways on the Shetlands, but you do have to stop at the barrier for aircraft using the runway at Sombra Airport. Our second night on Shetland was dominated by the wind. We took advantage of a wall for some shelter and allowed for the forecast change in wind direction, but it went the other way, and we were up early for the sake of our tents. It didn't seem to bother the ponies. The bay at Bannermin was once like the beach at St Ninians, but is now strengthened by a causeway. The rocks at the entrance to the bay are striking. The weather wasn't easing, and the cloud level dropped. Still strikingly beautiful, but 30-mile-an-hour winds are hard work for cyclists. Scalloway is the ancient capital of the Shetlands and still dominated by Scalloway Castle, the ancient fortress of a hated ruler. This memorial to the Shetland bus, the fishing boats repatriating the escaped Allied military personnel from Norway to Britain during the 39-45 war. It's over 200 miles of open sea to Norway. Fish farming is much in evidence, and a little peat is still dug for fuel. But fishing dominates the economy after oil. We were told that these boats may fish for only 60 days a year, but make millionaires out of their owners. But the wind was taking its toll, and we returned to Lerwick, where we luxuriated in a hotel for our final night, watching the Bresse ferry from our hotel room window. There was just time for a couple of tourist photos. Apart from TV fame, this house was built as part of a landing stage and trading post dating from the 1770s. And of course, who wouldn't want a picture of the police station? But our trip was nearly over. Sombra Head was in cloud as we passed on the overnight ferry to Aberdeen. But we'd done it. So much could have turned out differently, but our whole trip had been a success. We'd cycled 1,550 miles, taking in the southwest, northwest and northeast corners of the UK. We'd visited 2 distinct archipelagos, and we'd achieved what we'd set out to do. It was a great feeling and an immense privilege. And the journey home was fine. 24 hours of relatively easy travelling, and this is a picture just to prove that I did actually arrive.